Hello, everyone. Let me begin by thanking Ramanujan College for inviting me to give these lectures on real analysis. This is special to me because real analysis was the first course when I was in university where I really learned what is mathematical thinking at a higher level. It was the first course where I was exposed to proper rigor. And it was also the course where I learned that rigor is not just about doing correct proofs or just getting all your steps correct. It is about analyzing and improving your mathematical thinking. So, in real analysis, when one emphasizes rigor, it is in order to improve the way one thinks about mathematics. You question everything that you do, that you suspect, that you believe, and you try to justify it, but you also try to improve it. And so, this is a way not only to correctness, but to creativity. And so real analysis became for me the course where I first started to become confident of my mathematical abilities and also more excited about mathematics itself. So, what happens when you learn a theorem in real analysis? You do not just learn a theorem and its proof and stop there. You re examine everything that you did. You look at the proof itself and you ask where did this proof come from, how did someone think about it, would I be able to think about it if I had tried harder before reading the proof, could I have done it myself? Usually most proofs you can say yes, I could have done it, but then there are certain special theorems and special proofs where it is much harder to see how somebody ever could come up with it, and really you simply have to appreciate the creativity of the person who did so. But apart from the proof, as I was saying, the other thing is you look at the nature of the result itself. You ask whether, with a little more work, you could have improved the conclusion, or whether you could have made do with fewer assumptions, or whether varying the assumptions slightly, not necessarily making them stronger or weaker, but by varying them, could you generate other results equally interesting or perhaps more interesting results? Could you, by some variation, get a theorem that can be applied to completely different situations than the first one? Could you, for instance, switch the hypothesis and the conclusion and therefore have a theorem that goes the other way, the converse of the original? Or if you notice some symmetry in the things being talked about, then again, could you exploit that symmetry to create a new result? So real analysis is full of opportunities for us to fine tune our thinking like this and to learn how to think of new mathematics. And today I will just take two or three very familiar things and subject them to this sort of interrogation, come up with new things to ponder, and then give you a result which helps us resolve these particular examples, and in fact a result that is very useful all across analysis, both in proving high level theorems as well as in creating very interesting examples and counter examples. So the theorem that we're going to study is of course the Baire category theorem. I've already given the game away in by listing it as the topic of the talk, but still it's a result that's about 100 years old, that has been applied to many parts of analysis, as I said. And it's very interesting to see that you can be motivated to at least think about why someone would come up with such a result based on some very simple questions that are very natural to ask. But it's interesting how something that could conceivably come about from some very simple elementary questions finds so much use all across the subject. Okay, so let's begin with our first example. Okay, here we will just start with first the set of real numbers, right, written like this in the usual way. And then we have the set of rational numbers, Q. As you know, Q is countable. That means that it can be written as a sequence. You can write it as a list where there is a first rational number and a second rational number and a third one and so on. And this list can exhaust all the rational numbers. Whereas the real numbers we know is not countable, right? It's uncountable. Okay, so this is some quick background about real numbers and rational numbers. Let me also remind you that within real numbers, there is a notion of open set. So what's an open set? This is a union of open intervals. And there is a notion of closed set. And closed sets are complements of open sets. You can also think about closed sets in terms of limit points, accumulation points, etc. You can, right? So we won't get into that right now. I mean, that's standard stuff. I'm just sort of dropping words and reminding you that these are some standard terminologies associated to the real numbers. Now, if I look at the rationals, okay, I could think of it as a union of sets where each set consisted of exactly one of these numbers, q1, q2, etc. Right? So I could write q like this as a union of these sets. Okay. In other words, it is a countable union of closed sets. Okay. Now, as soon as you do this, uh, there is a natural sort of question which occurs. Closed sets and open sets are complementary, and so it is natural to ask if something can be written as a union of closed sets, whether I can reverse and I can write it as an intersection of open sets. Okay. So the question that comes from this simple fact is the following. Can Q be written as a countable intersection of open sets? Okay. Now, what we will do is not just go to an answer right away, but let us make an attempt. Let us see if we wanted to do this, how could we go about it? Okay. Well, if it's going to be written as an intersection of open sets, then each of these open sets must contain Q itself. And being open means that every time it contains a rational number, it must contain a little interval around it as well. Okay. So can we think of some sets which would do this, but which would not necessarily be the full real line? Okay. Can we attempt something like this? Okay. So in fact, let me to simplify things, let me attempt this over just the part of Q which is between 0 and 1. Since the real number is a countable union of such intervals, if I can do this over one such interval, I'll be able to do it over the whole thing. And of course, if I could do it over the whole thing, I could certainly do it over this small part. So let us concentrate on the intersection of Q with the closed interval 0, 1. And let me give this a name so that it's easy to refer to it, 0, 1. And I'll put subscript q to indicate that I'm only talking about the rational members of the closed interval 0 to 1. Okay. Now, since q is countable, this part of q is also countable. So let us take this part of q and let us list it, right? Let us see it as a list, p1, p2, etc. Okay. And now around each of these pi's, let us create a tiny open interval. Okay. And let's do the following. I will fix a positive number epsilon, and as the choice of name suggests, one should think of this as a small positive number. Of course, we never define what this small means, but what we mean is that actually we are not just thinking of one real number. When we say fix epsilon positive, in our mind we are willing to vary epsilon, and will be more interested in what happens when we shrink epsilon. Okay, so let us imagine that we have fixed some number epsilon. Okay. Okay, now what you do is around say P1, you take an interval whose width is epsilon. And then around P2, you take a smaller one. And around P3, you take a still smaller one. And you do it so that the lengths as they shrink, when you sum up, you get some finite number. Okay. So how do you do that? The easiest way to do that is to have the lengths go down in a geometric progression, and that way we know that the sum will be finite. Okay. So based on this epsilon, let us create a set O, okay, which is this union in which, starting with some Pn, I take a tiny interval around it, let us say of width or radius 2 to the epsilon by 2 to the n. Okay, like so. Okay. Now, by definition, this O epsilon is a union of open intervals, so it is an open set. Okay. And certainly, if Pn belongs to this particular interval, therefore to the union, and that happens for each Pn here. So this entire interval lies in O epsilon. Okay. And therefore, and this happens for every epsilon, right? So in particular, it happens if I take epsilon to be, say, 1 by k, right? And if I do that, and if it belongs to each of them, then of course it belongs to the intersection. So this must lie inside this intersection. Okay. Now I do not know if it's actually equal, right? That I still don't know. But at least I have put it inside an intersection of open sets, whether it turns out to be equal to them or not. But I could also have done this in a very trivial way, right? Simply take the entire O1Q as my open set and keep intersecting. Uh, sorry, take the entire interval 0 to 1 as the open part of the interval 0 to 1 and just keep intersecting by itself. And that will be a countable intersection of open sets, and this O1Q will be inside. Of course, it will not be equal, but it will be inside. Have I done better than that? Is all this work a significant improvement over the trivial thing we could have done? Let us see, right? So, for instance, let us add up the lengths of these, right? Okay. So the question is, let us try to get some idea of how big this is. Okay. Not in terms of cardinality, whether it's countable or uncountable, but in terms of its spread. Okay. And I will leave this slightly informal, but simply ask how big is O epsilon. And let us note that if I simply try to estimate this by taking the intervals inside it, okay, So take this interval. Okay. And let us ask how long this interval is. And let us sum up over all these lengths. And that gives us some idea of how big it is in the sense of, how dispersed is it across the real line. If this number is larger, then the set is right more dispersed, is longer in that sense. And if this number is total number is small, then it is probably shorter. Clearly, this is not a perfect measure of how long it is right now because these intervals will overlap with each other. So this is some sort of overestimate of how long the set O epsilon is. But let us see how big is this overestimate, right? If this overestimate itself turns out to be small, then we will have learned something. Well, each interval has radius as epsilon upon 2 to the n, and so its total width, its length, is 2 times that. And so I have epsilon 2n minus 1, which if I write out is epsilon and then n equal 1 gives me the first term as 1 and then the second term is half, etc. So all this adds up to 2, and so this is 2 epsilon, right? And so if I want to introduce some notion of length like this, right, by adding up the lengths of the parts, and even though I haven't done it formally, but one can see that whatever number I come up with, it needs to be less than this 2 epsilon. Okay. And therefore, if I now ask what number should be associated to the length of this set of rationals between 0 and 1, well, that too, because it's sitting inside this, should be less than equal to 2 epsilon. And this should be true for any epsilon positive. Therefore, there is only one number that is a valid candidate for the length of this interval of this set 0, 1, q. What is that valid number? The only possible candidate, of course, the only possible candidate is 0. Even though rational numbers are dense, they are present everywhere, but somehow the tiny gaps amongst them are making us say that if I were to say how long this set is, the answer is 0. Right? Whereas if you were to talk about the full interval 0 to 1 and ask how long that is, then of course the answer is 1. And so this is another way of saying that also that although the rationals are dense, seem to be present everywhere that you look, nevertheless they are taking up a small part of the interval, and their total length is this tiny thing 0 as opposed to the length of the full interval, which is 1. Okay. All right. So definitely, this thing that we did has a certain power, right? It is not a trivial thing that we have done. It is at least fitting the rationals closely enough to reveal that their total length must be 0. But is it matching them perfectly? Okay, that question still remains unanswered at this stage. Okay. So this thing that we got is powerful enough. You know, this is a subset. It's close enough. They are close enough so that you do learn something strong about this set. So this whole thing is what I'm talking about. This knowledge of containment is powerful enough to reveal that in a sense rationals are sparse while also being dense, so it's sort of contradictory, these two contradictory sort of things about rational numbers. Okay. So on the one hand, dense present everywhere, but somehow not present in a, I don't know how to say this, but in a very concentrated way. Present, but in a very thin way, so that the total length, when you try to add up, it comes out to just zero. Okay, let's take a more general look at at this situation. So in general, forget this particular choice of on. In general, if un are open sets in R and all of them contain Q, right? Then what am I interested in? I'm interested, of course, in the intersection. Okay, but what do I learn about them individually? Well, if they all contain Q, then they are all dense because Q is dense. So the question that arises is, what can we say? Is there any general statement that we can make about the intersection of such sets if I have a countable collection of open and dense subsets of R? And this is exactly what the Baire category theorem talks about. So let me tell you about what the Baire category theorem says about the real line. And today I will only state it in that generality. In later lectures, we will talk about what does it say about broader categories of sets, not just real numbers but other sets. And so we'll talk about complete metric spaces. And perhaps if I have time, I will say something about it at the topological space level also. Okay, what happens if you have locally compact topological spaces? So there are versions of Baire category theorem for different kinds of spaces. But the most elementary situation, and really, I mean, the one which one uses most on a day-to-day basis is what it says about the real numbers. And this is what it says about the real numbers, that if un, right, countable, right, indexed by natural numbers, are open and dense subsets of R, okay, and I'm interested in their intersection. So what can I say? Well, let's just look at it briefly without looking at the full question. But what can I say about U1 intersection U2? U1 is open, U2 is dense, and so you must have a point of U2 in U1, right? And so U1 intersection U2 must be a set which is open, right, and non-empty. But as soon as U1 and intersection U2 is open and non-empty, it must contain a point from U3 because U3 is dense, and therefore U1 intersection U2 intersection U3 must be non-empty and of course must be open. And so I think it must be obvious that if I take any finite collection of these UNs and take the intersection, so if I take any finite intersection, it's going to be non-empty and open. But the question is, what happens if you take an infinite intersection? Certainly, if you take an infinite intersection of open sets, you do not expect the final thing to be open. That's too much to hope for. But you can still hope for the non-empty part. It's not obvious, it's not direct from anything that I've said so far. but it has worked for the finite intersections. We can have some hope that it would work for countable intersections. And this is finally exactly what the Bayer category theorem gives us, that yes, if you have such open-end dense sets, countably many, you intersect all of them, then the one thing you can be sure of is that this intersection will be non-empty. There will be a point in it. Okay. All right. Now, a theorem like this, right? What can it do? So, for instance, going forward, one of the kinds of applications that we will have is that if you want some very special kind of object to exist, okay, you may not get the existence in one go. It may have infinitely many attributes, and it may be difficult to see that there is an object with those infinitely many attributes. But maybe you can prove that objects with finitely many of those attributes exist. That would usually be much easier, right? And then if such objects in some sense form an open and dense set, then then from Bayer category theorem, we will learn that there will be an object which has all those properties, right? Because the overall intersection is non-empty. Okay. And and then we will be done. We will have found, I mean, we'll not have found, I mean, we'll have found it in this very weird mathematical sense that we will have shown that if it's not there, you get a contradiction, and yet you do not perhaps get to know how to actually find it. Okay, so you'll have found it in that sense. We'll have shown its existence in that sense. So that is one of the ways in which the Bayer category theorem will be useful to us. We will certainly see some examples of this. Okay, now let me not try to prove the Bayer category theorem right now, but let us see what is its relevance to the question that we have been asking. Okay, so let's assume this theorem for now. Okay, so this is the Bayer category theorem, right? Let me put a box around it. This is a key thing. We should know where exactly it starts and ends, right? Okay, great. Okay, so that's the Bayer category theorem. Now assume this theorem, right? We'll deal with the proof later. Proof is not that hard, but first let us understand that this is useful, and then hopefully when we do the proof, we'll be more motivated in the details of the proof when we know that it matters. This is a useful thing to have. Okay, now right away it doesn't seem to say anything about your chances of ending up with Q. You are hoping to find an intersection which is exactly Q. Bayer category theorem is saying that any intersection will be non-empty. That, as such, doesn't seem to help in either direction, right? Uh, okay, it's non-empty gives you some hope it may be Q, but Q is so much more than empty that it's not obvious that it will get you there. Of course, if it had been empty, that would certainly have been a contradiction, but that's not the case. Okay, but okay. Let's not give up so fast. Let us see what the theorem can do. Okay. So let's try a proof by contradiction. So, and when I say that, I'm again sort of giving away. What I'm going to prove now is that Q cannot be written as a countable intersection of open and dense sets. Okay. So assuming the BCT, let us further assume that Q is a countable intersection of open and dense sets. Okay. Fine. Let's suppose this. Okay. On the other hand, we also know that Q is made of countably many individual points. And if I drop one of those individual points from R, so let me create some sets which I'll call Vn. And Vn is simply that from R, I remove Qn. Remember, Qn is the nth rational number in the list that we had of all the rational numbers. Now, what kind of set is this? Okay. Uh, I think it should be obvious that this is a dense set, and the individual point Qn is a closed set of R. So this complement of this individual point Qn must be an open set of R, right? So this Vn uh, is open and dense. Okay. Now let us take all these UNs and let us take all these VNs. Right? And let us consider them together. Okay, what will happen? Well, the UNs are a countable collection, so are the VNs. And then, as you know, if you take two countable sets and pool them, then the result is a countable set. So this is again a countable collection of open and dense sets, right? And what will be the intersection? Open and dense in R, of course. Now, what will be the intersection? So you take the intersection of all the UNs, right? And you take the intersection of all the VNs. And of course, you take the intersection of these two. So this is how you take the intersection of all of them. And what you get, right? Now, from the first one, you get the rationals. Now, the second one, think about it, right? Each time I take a Vn, I'm dropping one rational number. So when I intersect across all the Vn's, I actually end up dropping all the rational numbers, right? Because each rational number has shown up. Each Vn contains one of the rational numbers that we had, right? So when you, leaves out one of the rational numbers, and when you therefore intersect all the Vn's, you have left out all the rational numbers. So this in fact is just the complement of Q. Right? Each time you intersect with Vn, you lose a rational number. You intersect all of them, you lose all the rational numbers, you're left with the complement. Q intersection Q complement, of course, is the open empty set. And this thing now is in contradiction with the bare category theorem. Okay. Okay, so although at first glance it seemed not to, but then exploiting the countability of Q, we were able to do more. And we were able to actually prove that taking the bare category theorem for granted, we must accept that Q cannot be written. So that's interesting. You can come up with good approximations, but you can't get a perfect match. Yeah, so Q cannot be written as a countable intersection of open and dense subsets of R. Okay. Okay, so that was our first example. And we've taken about half an hour to do it. So I think this is where we finish this first lecture. In the second lecture, I'll take up an example at a higher level. It will involve Riemann integration. So it would be a good idea, I think, if you were to do a very quick review of Riemann integrals before viewing that lecture. Maybe, just getting a sense of how the integral is defined, not all the fine details, but especially the basic results and examples of what kinds of functions are Riemann integrable and some examples, at least one example of a function which is not Riemann integrable. So if you can do a quick review and just remember these facts, I will of course remind you of these things during the lecture itself. But still, I think it will go more nicely if you have already reviewed it, right? So that it doesn't sound strange at the time. Okay, so let me stop here and you review the Riemann integration and then you will be in shape to view the second lecture of this series. Thanks for watching. All right. Hope to see you in a bit. Okay. Bye.